Hi, and welcome to the show. Subscribe at kevinmd.com/podcast. Today, we welcome Chris McMains. He's an otolaryngologist. Today's Kevin MD article is The Hero's Journey, Understanding Professional Identity Formation in Graduate Medical Education. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much. I appreciate the opportunity.
All right, so just give us a brief story and journey, and then tell us why you wrote this Kevin MD article.
Sure. So, I'm of a vintage that trained in what is now sort of dismissively referred to as the bad old days. And in fairness, like there were a lot of elements of that were unnecessarily harsh. And what I've observed over time is that trainees of mine have, what would you say, that they have elected to resist some elements of training that are actually really important for them developing skills, developing knowledge, developing, attitudinal expertise that are going to be really valuable, maybe even necessary to them as practicing clinicians. And so, the way that I've interpreted that is that it seems that this notion of work-life balance has supplanted whatever else used to live there at sort of the apex of the value hierarchy. And in general, I'll go on record to say I'm for it. I'm for work-life balance, But I also ask myself the question of like, are there some unintended consequences here that we need to explore? And I think that this sort of resistance to some elements of the harder part of training may be some of those unintended consequences. And so, you know, I'm one of those brains that reads a lot outside of medicine as well. And Joseph Campbell's work, The Hero with a Thousand Faces, talks about, this narrative architecture of the hero's journey. Somebody is called out of their home, what's comfortable. There's this call to adventure, and then they leave, they meet sort of increasingly complex challenges that, frankly, when they begin their journey, they're not ready or not equipped to overcome. But through the course of their journey, they meet friends who have maybe some different skills that they can learn from or that can be lent to these challenges. They meet mentors who may have some specific knowledge that they need, eventually building a skill set to where they can overcome a final ordeal. And so if you think about, any of the sort of myths that we live with. So, Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter, any of those, they follow this arc. And it felt to me like this might be actually a helpful narrative architecture to help our trainees or frame their experience, the challenges that they're meeting in a way that actually redeems or ennobles the many sacrifices that are required in medical training along the way, in a way that might be actually more helpful than just thinking about work-life balance as everyday feats.
So, what would be some examples or stories that you've observed either through your trainees or from what you've seen in terms of perhaps placing work-life balance at the apex at the expense of what you say are some important professional attributes?
Sure. So, I think one of the things I think about is, I'm a surgeon, and so I realize that the obligation that surgeons feel towards their patients, and frankly that are enshrined in our sort of ethical codes of conduct, will enshrine a more longitudinal responsibility to patients perhaps than some other fields. And that isn't trying to throw shade on anybody else. It's just the way that things are designed. And so I have oftentimes been asked or have heard our residents sort of only after the fact realize that they have not followed up on patients and have just tried to transmit or shift the responsibility for longitudinal care to other of their colleagues. And so there's a degree to which that's appropriate and fine. There's also a degree to which that watching both development of pathology as well as people's recovery from pathology and seeing that at interval time points is really the only way to generate the understanding of those diseases and the understanding of what normal or abnormal or worrisome or not worrisome look like. And you just have to be there in some circumstances. And so that's perhaps not a perfect example, but it is one of those things like there just isn't a simulation that can or a YouTube video that people can watch that can give people all of what they need to be an excellent clinician and an excellent caretaker of other human beings.
And then when you bring this up, whether it's through feedback or through general didactic sessions about the expectations, what are some of the responses that you receive?
Yeah, it varies widely. Frankly, there's some people who I think are really open to this message and open to this notion. And I think one of the things that I want to highlight about the kind of hero's journey is like you're just not who you need to be at the end of your journey to overcome your ordeal. And I think the analog is really effective for medical
Mhm.
training. Any of us starting medical training, we're not yet the person or the professional that we need to become in order to take excellent care of people. And so for those folks who have an openness to that understanding, then I think they can take that on. I think there are many of us who have built an identity around excellence and about being around being a high performer that makes this a hard message to hear. The message of you're not yet the person that you need to be. You're not yet performing at the level you need to. And I know myself, like I'm have historically been a pretty ego defended individual, and a lot of years of therapy and a lot of
Mhm.
development along the way have become more and more open to this, to where it feels less of an identity threat and more of an invitation to growth. And so it really, I think the answer to your question sort of depends on where people are in that journey as well, and understanding of the need for ongoing growth.
So go into more detail about that narrative arc, that hero's journey that certainly can reframe this issue.
Yeah, so it begins with a call to adventure, a leaving of the known. And then people will they'll be co-journeyers. So you'll meet different co-travelers. Like I said, you'll meet the different ordeals along the way. It's like there's smaller tasks, smaller things to overcome along the way. There's the introduction of a mentor, maybe one or more, who's got, in the language of Joseph Campbell, has like the secret knowledge or the sacred knowledge
Mhm.
that can be delivered, and eventually culminating in preparation for the hero for a final ordeal. And then, and this to me, the kind of the exciting part is once they've been able to overcome that ordeal, they can return with the treasure. And so if we're going to apply this then to the journey of medical education, either undergraduate or graduate medical education, you have the call to adventures. You're showing up. You've decided to pursue this. You've decided on your chosen field, your clinical field, your clinical specialty. And so there's another element of this, which is a refusal of the call. And again, if for those of us who are Lord of the Rings fans, you know that, like, Frodo and friends left the Shire, but who showed up kind of in the immediate wake of that were like the ring wraiths. And so, like, there's real consequence to refusing the call. And so where's the analog here in terms of graduate medical education? Well, we've all seen trainees of ours who just have a hard time making the required commitment. And we had a trainee within the last several years who just decided that it was too much, that there were too many sacrifices that were going to be required of this individual. That individual wanted to live a different life, and again, fair play. She realized that she was on the wrong journey, that like her path
Mhm.
needed to go somewhere else. And again, entirely fair. That's different for everybody. But just to say that there are consequences to refusing the call. And so in this individual chose a different path. But if we refuse the call and we don't progressively develop these skills, we're not going to generate the treasure. And so there's going to be some loss personally. We're not going to become the professional we might be able to become. But there's also going to be some impact on our patients because we're not going to be performing at the level that they need of us. So again, if we're overlaying this on top of medical education, hopefully we meet co-residents who are supportive, who provide some of the skills, some of the insights that we may not have at the onset, whether those be people in our year cohort, senior residents, maybe even some of our juniors have some things that we need from them. Hopefully, faculty will serve in the role of mentors. Maybe again, other co-trainees will be in the role of mentors. Patients may be. There are any number of places that mentorship can come to help frame what it looks like to take a seat at the table of professionals. And ultimately, overcoming this ordeal to my mind, it's thinking about like developing the body of expertise that's required to masterfully practice as a clinician, and then returning with the treasures, whatever community people then leave training to become part of, they have something of worth that they can bring to that community, and then that treasure that they have, that thing of worth, becomes something that enriches and beautifies the communities that they serve.
So it sounds like we have two ends of a spectrum, of course, where one places work-life balance at the pinnacle, and the other way where medicine used to be, where medicine was a calling and you would sacrifice everything that you have for medicine. Is there a path in the middle that can address some of the issues on both ends of that spectrum?
Yeah, I think it's a terrific point you make, and part of what I resist about the characterization of work-life balance is that I think that it creates a false binary. That it sort of enshrines everything that happens inside the four walls of the hospital as, negative, to be resisted. If we're going to approach that from a strict critical theory, that it's just an expression of power that's perhaps unjust. On the other hand, everything that happens outside the four walls of the hospital is nourishing and to be celebrated. And I think that draws those lines in an unhelpfully sharp distinction. I think all of us can think about interactions we've had with patients that we're proud of,
Hmm.
skills that we've developed, procedures we've executed that we've done in a masterful way, emotional needs of patients that we've been able to address. And maybe we've only been able to address them because of some of the relationships and nourishing that we have from outside the hospital. So this notion of I can be a better clinician because of the deep love I have for my family and the commitments I have outside of the hospital. There's some emotional resources that I can bring only because of those things, and can meet that patient need. Similarly, there's some of the things that I do through work that energize me, that make me stand taller, that make me proud, that again make me come back and be a more loving husband, father, brother, son in those relationships as well. And so again, I think you asked the perfect question, which is about, I think the crux of it is this false binary that gets created by that work-life balance construction. And so, when we've talked about this, the sort of tagline is a better story, the hero's journey. It's a better story for professional development, professional identity formation.
So, as you said earlier, everyone has a different journey, right? Everyone brings different values to the table when it comes to managing both their personal professional life or how much satisfaction they gain from each sphere, right? Is it one size fit all? Like how can we change medical education to better fit and customize each individual's journey, as you put it, or personal values?
Yeah, again, you ask a terrific question. And I want to say, just in general, the swing towards recognizing trainees as human beings over the last, 20 years that I've been a faculty member is so radically different. And I think on balance, positive and ennobling. And so I think that appreciation for trainees as individuals is a really helpful first step. And the conversation that's come up, since the Flexner 2 report around professional identity formation and just what it means, and trying to even initiating those conversations around like what is it that we're talking about when we talk about, a professional in our field. And there's some good literature to show that's different from field to field. Internal medicine is going to look different from
Right.
surgery, et cetera. But taking that then one step deeper or one step more granular to the individual trainee, because one of the other things that I think is apparent through literature is that two people can go through the same set of circumstances, the exact same clinical experience, and those things can resonate in different ways and have radically different effects on their professional identity trajectory. And so being sensitive to that, and I think us as faculty, particularly faculty leadership, leaning into those conversations as the potential mentor to the extent that our trainees welcome that and help navigate or narrate that in a way that makes explicit the things that we're trying to role model and their responses to those interactions.
So, on a practical level, how do you incorporate that hero's journey framework when you talk to your trainees? Like, how do you implement this? Is it through didactics, through one-on-one, sessions you have with them? So, how do you frame that journey into the
Yeah.
eyes of your trainees?
Yeah, the answer is yes, all of that. So I've had the privilege to have the opportunity to speak in front of larger groups, incoming interns, whether at the institutional level or that's at multiple institutions as well as at the individual program level. And man, I love the opportunity to do those. I did one of those just 3 days ago.
Mhm.
Um, and also at the individual level, otolaryngology is really in some ways privileged because we've got such a small group. Our training program has 3 people a year, and so we really do have the opportunity to have a longitudinal relationship with trainees that makes these sorts of opportunities more present than if I was just working with somebody as a one-off or perhaps
Mhm.
1 week at a time on wards or that sort of. So we've got a luxury there. And also, I mean, it's a luxury, but it's also a responsibility, right? Because if I talk about all of this stuff and talk about the nobility of sacrifice, and I don't live into that, like my my residents are all smart and keen-eyed, and they can see right through it. And so it in some ways forces me to a degree of integrity that pushes me to a better space, to be a better professional myself.
We're talking to Chris McMains. He's an otolaryngologist. Today's Kevin MD article is The Hero's Journey, Understanding Professional Identity Formation in Graduate Medical Education. Chris, let's end with some take-home messages that you want to leave with the Kevin MD audience.
Yeah, so both at the trainee level and at the faculty level, we're on this journey of ongoing professional growth, and that work-life balance as a construction has some limitations, and one of the big ones there, I think, is the unintended consequences that come from this false binary. I think it's really helpful to have a narrative architecture like the hero's journey that can frame the sacrifices that each of us have to make to become the professionals we need to be in a way that redeems that redeems the sacrifices and ennobles that in ways that we can appreciate that and embrace that, knowing that it's not going to be every day we're going to have to make those sacrifices. We'll hopefully be able to take a knee, take a break, but those things will nourish our capability to fill those other roles that we have to lean into and live into in our lives.
Chris, thank you so much for sharing your perspective and insight. And thanks again for coming on the show.
Grateful for the opportunity. Thank you.